Once more, the podcast begins. The Emperor Paul Muad'Dib on his ascension to the Lion Throne.
Welcome to Gom Jabbar, your guide to the iconic world of Dune. We'll be exploring the themes, philosophies, and characters found in the sandy depths of this vast universe, from Frank Herbert's groundbreaking novels to the adaptations on film and TV. My name is Leo.
And my name's Abu.
And we are back with Dune Messiah.
Dune Messiah!
Episode 2. Let's go!
Oh my gosh. We continue to go deeper and deeper into this book, and I continue to be awed.
It's insane. Yeah.
Well, before we dive into today's pages, as always, let's blast through some quick housekeeping. As a reminder, this is a book club series where we will be diving into the pages of Dune Messiah, 50 pages at a time in each episode, and we hope you join us on this journey. A reminder that we have already covered the entirety of the first book in a 10-part series very similar to this one.
Right. And to our patrons, we'd like to say thank you so much. Your support means absolutely everything in the world to us and makes Gom Jabbar a possibility. So I would like to say to anybody on the fence, know that we post spicy, sometimes not safe for work bloopers behind the scenes and bonus content every week for patrons. So consider supporting us at patreon.com/Gom Jabbar. Speaking of, Abu, we've got some Kwisatz Haderachs to shout out.
Yeah, oh my gosh. Case Aiken and Nathaniel Hyde are two Kwisatz Haderach level patron members. Their generosity clearly knows no bounds, and we are immeasurably grateful. Thank you, Case and Nathaniel. And of course, thank you to all of our listeners and all of our patrons. Every little bit helps keep this show going.
It really does. We also have, if you're in the mood for some merchandise, we have some Dune merchandise available. So, if you want to flex on those dweebs who haven't read this book series, find out which of your friends are worth keeping, which of them are, lay people who don't read dope books. So check out gomjabbarshop.com. We've got shirts. We've got an enamel pin, which looks so good. We've got a sticker and some other stuff. Check it out.
Definitely. And this is a book club series, and we want your voice to be a part of it. So email us at gomjabbarpodcast@gmail.com. And if you are a patron or are thinking of becoming one, we have a Discord server exclusively for patrons, which is the best way to get in touch with us and geek out about Dune along with us.
Indeed. And just before we get to some of those messages from our listeners, one final bit of housekeeping. We are keeping this book club 100% spoiler free.
That's right.
So fear not if you are forging this path for the first time in your life. We are going to talk about everything from Dune, the first book, but only up through the page that we've read for today's reading in Messiah. So protecting your first experience if this is, in fact, your first experience.
Absolutely. Now, before we jump into the pages for today's reading, we do want to take a second to talk about some mailbag questions. And specifically today, we had some great questions from Evan James, who, like many of you listening, is reading Dune Messiah for the first time. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey, Evan.
Yeah. Buckle up.
Now, Evan wrote us this iconically lengthy email, which so many of you do. We love it. Keep doing that.
It's great. It's like our scripts.
Yeah, they're so long. It's incredible. Instead of reading that email in its entirety, we're going to do our best to paraphrase some of the questions that he had in that email for the sake of time.
So the first question is, why did Paul allow the jihad to happen? The Fremen don't seem interested in political power or waging war across the galaxy, so why couldn't Paul just tell them not to do that? He is their god. Also, couldn't Paul just cut off spice for any house that rebels against him as a way to kind of force them to submit?
Really great set of questions, and
Yeah.
all sort of connected to this idea that isn't Paul the most powerful person in the galaxy? Why can't he just tell the Fremen not to do it?
Right.
You know? And we touched on this a little bit in our previous book club episode in one of the takeaways. But as a first time reader, it can be a little confusing to square the fact that Paul has these incredible, almost Marvel superhero esque powers.
Yeah.
But doesn't seem to have this unlimited power in the galaxy, especially here in Dune Messiah. And we'll actually see more examples of that all throughout this book. So, like we said, Evan, buckle up. Things are going to get weird.
Breaking down the question a little bit, let's cite the real world for a second. Looking at religions and religious figures, historically, very few of them, if any at all, have actually been able to stop their supporters from being violent. Like, to be clear, right?
Unfortunately, yeah.
Unfortunately. Every major religion today very clearly forbids killing, and yet it happens in the name of religion all the time.
Yes.
The words and commandments of religious leaders and texts are very easily twisted, as we see in our real world, but as is also the case here in Dune. Sort of the example being like, but Muad'Dib didn't technically say not to kill them, though, right? Like, can't I kill most of them? Right? And it's like, no, guys, ask him. And he'll be like, no, please don't.
Yeah.
But they probably don't, Even if they did, right? Even if he said, guys, don't kill them, there's always going to be those kind of nefarious actors within the ranks who twist it to fit their own agendas, right?
Definitely. Now, secondly, you have to remember that Paul was forced to use the Fremen to quell a number of rebellions and uprisings in his empire. We talked about in the previous episode, the origins of that jihad actually started with great houses rebelling against Paul's leadership. And thus, Paul had to use these Fremen to assert his control as the new emperor, to clamp down on any rebellions from the great houses who wouldn't accept his rule. And it's important to also remember that Paul is not a fairly elected official in any sense of the word.
What? No, I remember the election at the end of Dune. It's a famous scene. Yeah.
Right. The poll watchers, I remember it. It was great.
Yeah, it was a close race. They had to recount.
Yeah, no, none of that happened. There were no poll watchers because there were no polls.
Right.
Paul took the throne.
Yeah.
And he's not even like the rightful heir, or even loosely the rightful heir. He's not even like the cousin of some cousin of some cousin. Like, he simply took the throne from the previous emperor. He is literally a usurper.
Right.
And if you violently take power, there's going to be a lot of bloodshed that follows, and that inevitably happens in order to assert that control. That's what he has to do.
Right.
So what started out as a political necessity, as a way to control his empire, to assert his rule, then evolved into a religious jihad, because as we know, Fremen culture and politics are deeply intertwined with their religion.
Right.
That's the thing that Paul in the first book, manipulate is maybe too strong a word, but certainly used to his advantage to achieve that victory that happens at the end of the first book. He really feeds into this idea that he is the Messiah. But it starts to backfire here. He needs the Fremen to assert his control. The Fremen believe deeply in their religion, and when they start seeing these great houses commit to what to them is sin, because going against Paul the Messiah is sin in their eyes.
Yeah.
It really becomes this religious fanaticism where it's no longer just about asserting Paul's role as emperor, but asserting Paul's role as God. And if you don't get in line behind that, the Fremen will have some words with you.
By which we mean some Chris knives. They will have some Chris knives with you. The other side of this, beyond what he can and cannot do, is what he should or shouldn't do politically. Like, what is the smart move in this scenario? And cutting off the spice, as you kind of pointed out, would be a great way of clamping down on maybe one person, but as a broad strategy would be a terrible political move.
Mm-hmm.
Paul has that option, but it would immediately push people who are maybe on the fence into a very actively anti-Paul place. And really would be inviting a galactic war. I mean, if he took that sort of drastic measure, we would see basically what Alia points out in the council meeting, right, from today's reading. She has this quote: "You don't back people into a corner, not if you want them to remain peaceful." End quote.
Yeah, definitely. Great question, Evan.
Yeah.
Now, Evan actually had a second question in that email as well. He asked, Paul is a mentat and has prescient visions, so why can't he just calculate a way to appease Irulan? Why not just sleep with her and use his prana bindu control to make sure he never impregnates her? Keep dangling that carrot of maybe having an heir in front of her to keep her in line. Basically, why is he not more politically savvy and cunning when dealing with the troublesome Irulan?
Yeah. It's an interesting question, and I've got a thought about that, but let's address the kind of meat of the question first. I think it might be simpler than we could make it out to be. We could make it this complex answer about in-world techniques and that sort of thing. But Paul is, let us not forget, human, and he deeply, deeply loves Chani. And although he is currently the godhead at the head of a jihad that's killing lots and lots of people, he is at the core an Atreides leader. He's a good guy who believes in honor and believes in doing what's right. And although Chani is like, yo, you should do basically what Evan thinks you should do, right? I remember when Chani said that in the book, she's like, yo, Evan's got a good idea. You should sleep with Irulan, appease her, do what's right for the Empire. And Paul, sure enough, is thinking, no, I couldn't do that to you. Like, that's just too much pain to deliver to Chani. That's too terrible, too awful,
Yeah, at the end of the day, I think the answer to this question is really simple. Paul is a good guy who really loves his girl and doesn't want to fuck around with this other girl that he honestly doesn't even like.
Right.
No matter the political necessity. Frankly, I think that could be a character flaw if you look at it from a purely political standpoint, right?
Right.
It would behoove him to be a little more cunning, to manipulate Irulan a little more aggressively, but he doesn't. He's just kind of like, you're not going to have my baby. I'm not going to sleep with you, but you can do whatever you want. Go sleep around, whatever.
Yeah. It's like tough love. It's like, I don't want to be shitty to you. I'm just going to tell you straight up, you're not going to get a kid from me. Like, sorry, pull the Band-Aid off quickly. Deal with that however you want to. I'm here to support you, but I will not give you this thing. It does seem like the thing that an Atreides would do.
Yes. And look, Paul's honesty here, his Atreides attitude about all of this, is what makes him our protagonist, right?
Right.
It's what makes him human and relatable. And for us as the reader, it's what puts us on his side. Even if he is responsible for a bloody jihad across the galaxy, you can still be like, but he's not cheating on his girl.
Right.
Yeah.
And,
I kind of joke about that, but really, Paul is a conflicted character in all of this. And if we didn't see this more human side of him, it would be very easy to be like, wow, he's a giant dick now that he's the emperor.
Yeah. I also, I actually really like this idea. Jessica taught Paul as one of the first males in history that we know of with the prana bendu control. She's giving him these Bene Gesserit techniques. I wonder if he could even do that. Like, can Paul not impregnate someone using prana bendu?
I mean, is that even a prana bindu technique, considering it's a Bene Gesserit skill?
I mean, I'm assuming, considering prana bendu doesn't specify a set of nerve control, it's just overall nerve control. I'm assuming in theory, it approaches, maybe Paul could transfer how he learned how to move his left pinky fingernail to, the internal parts
his
of him.
Scrotum.
Scrotum. I mean, how do you teach a Bene Gesserit sister to not conceive or to conceive a specific gender? That is already pretty abstract. So
yeah,
probably he could apply it. But I do like the idea of Jessica going, yeah, I'm just not going to touch that.
yeah, right.
You figure it out on your own, experiment with, whoever's around, but you're on your own for that one, bud.
I mean, look, the birds and the bees conversation is awkward enough for parents.
Yeah.
Imagine the sperm control conversation. Like, damn, you
When the
know?
bee is going to sting a bird and wants to keep the stinger from, it's
Yeah. Yeah, wild stuff. But again, a really great observation from Evan. And
totally.
as a first-time reader, I'm kind of blown away, Evan, that you would think of something like that, because I've read and reread the book multiple times and never once thought about sperm control as a possible idea. So really, like, truly hats off to you. Such great questions. And there was a ton more in that email that we don't have time to get into today, but we love to get emails and questions like this. And this is, of course, stuff that other listeners might be thinking as well. So continue to write to us and we will continue to include them in these episodes. Thanks again for writing, Evan. You have set the example for the rest of our listeners.
Yeah. Now that we've talked about Evan's incredible questions, let's get into the reading from today's assigned reading. And God, there's so much to unpack during these chapters, even though it's only 3 chapters. But we're going to do our best to keep it moving. And we'll see how it goes.
Right. Okay. Chapter 5. We are back with everybody's favorite Tleilaxu shapeshifter, Scytale.
Gross.
And we join him on Arrakis now. He is being sort of lightly interrogated by Farouk, one of the veterans of Paul's troops and the 12-year jihad, who is now seemingly retired and living off of his hard work in this village in Arrakeen, no longer living that siege lifestyle, which will become important in just a second.
Right.
And actually, a fun fact, Farouk might sound like a familiar name because we met him in the first book.
Yeah.
He is the one who asked about those leader johns of Jessica's water after Paul's naming ceremony. And he's also the one that broke the news to Paul that Chani's father, Liet Kynes, was dead. So he played a small role in the first book, and it's cool to see
he got his SAG
a returning
card.
character. Yeah, he got his SAG card, and he got that bag. You know, you get those 2 speaking lines or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Now, Scytale, who, reminder, is a face dancer, a shapeshifter, has chosen, this is a weird flex, has chosen to appear as Duncan Idaho.
I mean, I would if I could. Just walking around, people like, damn, that guy fucks.
Right. Look, not a bad choice on a normal day in a normal place.
Yeah.
But a horrible choice if you are conspiring against the Emperor and are in his capital city.
Yeah. Arrakeen, where no one knows what Duncan, Idaho looks like. Bro was getting drunk every night in that city.
Right. He
Like
fucked his
10
way
years
through
ago.
that city. It's a bit of a weird flex here. And even Scytale is kind of like, oh shit, should I have done this? Will someone recognize me? And turns out Farouk did know of Duncan, Idaho, I guess, but his memory is a little foggy and he's not entirely certain. He kind of brings it up with Scytale, but it doesn't end up being a major thing.
Right.
Again, it's been over 14 years since probably Farouk saw Duncan, and he's seen plenty between now and then.
Yeah.
We also learn in this section that Farouk is part of this conspiracy against Muad'Dib. He may not be in that core Ocean's 11 group that we talked about in the previous chapters, but he is disenchanted with Muad'Dib, with the Emperor, with the Jihad, and everything that's taken place since the Atreides landed on Arrakis. And the core reason why Farouk is turning against Paul is because he is old school. A lot of things have changed under Paul's rule on Arrakis, in the Empire at large, and with Fremen culture. And he wants to go back to the good old days.
Right.
The good old days where you lived in a siege, you stabbed off-worlders, and you rode a worm off into the sunset.
Yeah.
I find this really interesting because as a millennial who, okay, boomer is such a thing in our current culture and real life.
Uh-huh.
This idea that like, oh, there's a group of people who wishes they could go back to the quote unquote old days because they don't realize how bad the old days actually were.
Right.
Rose tinted glasses, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
Farouk, sure. Like maybe, yes, he's an older Fremen. Maybe he is part of that okay boomer generation.
Yeah. Is Farouk a Karen? Is that what you're saying?
Farouk is a Karen. Maybe.
I want to talk to your Nabe, all right? Where's your Nabe? Bring me your Messiah right now. I'm not wearing my still
you
mask.
You can't make me take off this mask, okay? My nose plugs fucking stay where they are, okay? Where's the Nabe?
Bring me your Nabe. God,
Jesus.
all the Gen Z Fremen are like, ugh.
Ugh. I haven't worn my nose plugs in days.
God, that's so chuggy.
So chooky. Farouk. You're so chooky, my guy.
So chuggy.
At the same time, look, we're ragging on Farouk for being chuggy, which, of course, he is. That's undeniable. Don't write us emails about how Farouk is not chuggy. At the same time, he has a point. Paul has come in, changed the face of the Empire, changed the face of Arrakis, and thrust a cultural change upon the Fremen.
Yeah.
So he does have a point. It's a very chuggy point, but the point stands that Paul has made these cultural changes that, in his eyes, make the Fremen less than what they used to be.
Right.
Now, Farouk does his best to slyly answer some of Saitel's questions, but the conversation does veer off course a little bit, and we learn that Farouk, he gets a little reminiscent.
Right.
We learn that Farouk was a commander in Paul's jihad, of course. He's a veteran of that conflict. And we also learned that Farouk's son lost his eyes on the planet of Mirage when something called a stone burner was used in one of the conflicts there. We also learned that Farouk at some point wanted to buy Tleilaxu eyes for his son, but his son refused and instead chose to remain blind. And if you have questions about why, hang tight. More about Tleilaxu eyes in the morsels later in the episode. Reminiscing aside, Saitel really wants to get down to business and asks Farouk straight up, have you been inside the Imperial Keep?
Right.
Can you tell me what's going on? Where does Paul sleep?
Yeah. Is he allergic to peanuts?
Is he allergic to peanuts? We have this whole idea about peanuts. Will it work?
We're building our entire conspiracy around supposed nut allergy. We hope it works.
Right. Now, Farouk's answers are a mixed bag. Yes, no, not really. Maybe he has been inside the Imperial Keep at one point for this fancy dinner that Paul threw for his jihad commanders.
Right.
Farouk was very disgusted by everything going on in that dinner. Not as interested in any of the slave girls that were apparently offered to the commanders that night. Saitel is like, okay, I got you. I hear you. Let's focus back on the Atreides.
Right.
Less musing, more telling me about the Imperial Keep.
Yeah.
Of course, Farouk continues to reminisce, but this is really interesting, and I loved this part of this conversation, no matter what Saitel may be feeling at the moment.
Right.
Farouk tells us that he enlisted in the jihad because of a promise to see something called the sea. And he does. On the planet of Enfail, he wades into the water. He drinks from it, which is not recommended. Don't follow Farouk's example.
A lot of salt.
You can't just drink ocean water.
Who knows? Maybe that water is like, I don't know, toxic. Oceans are not all the same. That's
right.
A bad move, but he's impressed. Whatever.
Yeah. And despite the high salt content, this is very much a spiritual moment for him. He is moved by this experience, getting to wade out into this water that reaches all the way to the horizon. He can't see the other end of it. Something he's never seen in his life. And he emerges from this water, and there's a lot of religious imagery here, sort of a baptism for him.
Self-baptism, yeah.
Yeah. He emerges from this water a new man. And in that moment, he feels cured from the jihad.
Right.
It's a really moving moment, and the way Farouk is describing it really sucks Saitel in, surprisingly. Quote, Saitel found himself sharing the old Fremen's awe. End quote.
Yeah, I love that.
Now, Saitel does, despite all the empathy, does have this incredible thought. Quote, this one is garrulous but deep. And for the folks that don't know what garrulous means, like us, we had to Google it too. The definition basically means talkative. So Saitel's like, yo, this guy fucking talks too much, but what he's saying, real deep shit.
We get that feedback a lot in our listener mail.
Right.
God.
Much like this podcast.
Yeah. Garrulous but deep. That's our goal.
Yeah. That is straight up the motto. Okay, let's wrap up chapter 5 because this conversation finally comes to a close. Farouk's son stops playing that balisette in the background. He's been playing this entire time, which lends like a very creepy vibe throughout this whole chapter. But the music suddenly cuts off, and we realize that the music was actually a trigger that was transmitting information to Scytale's D-Stron, the D-Stron that's installed in him. And when that task is complete, he has all the information he needs. And so Scytale asks to meet Othaim's daughter. And unfortunately for everyone in the room at this point, Scytale kills Farouk and then kills Farouk's son.
Right.
And Othaim's daughter doesn't notice all of this happening because she is very, very much addicted to Samuta. And seemingly in this scene at this point is sort of like so high that she's tripping out of reality and doesn't know what's happening around her. It's clear that Scytale is somewhat sympathetic to all of his victims in this scene because the chapter ends on a very ominous note. Quote, "Now the young woman would have to be given her chance." End quote.
Creepy.
Creepy stuff.
We are into chapter 6, and buckle up, folks, we're having an Imperial Council meeting. From Alia's perspective, we note that pretty much everyone is tense. This is not like a laid-back, fun, casual meeting. Everyone's here. We're at this golden council table, and between these like 5 people, we've got a dozen secrets and objectives. Paul commands Korba the suck-up to take up his place in leading the masses in their prayer. Korba's like, no, but they're going to expect you. Paul rebuttals in almost like a chillingly apathetic way. He says, quote, "Put on your turban. They'll never know at this distance." End quote.
Yikes.
Like, man, Paul is fully checked out at this point. He's like, oh, God, someone else be the Messiah of today. Just
senioritis.
Yeah, just dress up one of the, I don't know, put a scarecrow up there. They won't figure it out.
Right.
Stilgar, in the meantime, has fully become Paul's personal assistant, which is kind of devastating.
Yeah, that's a glow down, my guy.
It's a glow down, bro. No kidding. And it's really genuinely hard to picture Javier Bardem and just Stilgar as a character. You know, we know by Fremen power structures that he's one of the most capable fighters in the Fremen, period. And here he is sorting papers, pulling up different folders, trying to keep the meeting going.
Yeah.
It's that same sense that Stilgar is no longer his own man. He is a part of the machine of Muad'Dib. Next up on the docket, Stilgar reminds them, the Tupil Treaty. Basically, the political sanctuary planet Tupil remains the last kind of resting ground for Landsrad members, and the guild wants Paul to kind of re-up and kind of sign this treaty without telling him exactly where it is. Stilgar doesn't like this. As a Fremen, he's thinking about the tactical qualities of having a whole place that they can't see or don't know where it is. Paul agrees to sign the treaty, though he later on basically adds in, as part of that agreement, that in exchange for that signature, the guild will basically have to take his side against the Ixians, who, like so many of us, just don't want to pay tax. they're like, no, don't charge us so much. And Paul's like, well, no, gonna charge you tax. Sorry, buds. I actually kind of love this detail, that little negotiation.
Yeah, me too.
It really does show that Paul, young Paul, has become quite the savvy kind of political figure. He knows how to levy these forces against one another.
Yeah.
During this conversation, Stilgar asks the question we all might be thinking at this point regarding Tupil. Hey, Paul, can't you, like, fucking just look at it? Like, can't you just see it, Mr. Kwisatz Haderach? And Paul answers in a way that we will get into a little bit in the takeaways, but there's a lot to chew on here about prescience and causality. Side note to all of this, Stilgar, as much as he's sort of glowed down in all of this. He's now kind of a paper pusher. I do appreciate the character writing from Frank here. That, there's this moment that Paul explains his why he can't just use his prescient vision to see Tupil. And after that kind of confusing as fuck TED talk, Stilgar's like, okay. What about your signature though? And I kind of love it. And Paul has this little reflection. Quote, "The issue of the oracle, by Stilgar's judgment, had been closed. Stilgar aimed only at victory, not at discovering truth. Peace, justice, and a sound coinage, these anchored Stilgar's universe. He wanted something visible and real, a signature on a treaty." End quote.
Ugh, I love that so much.
It's great, and I think it really shows that Frank understands his characters. It is 100% the type of thing Stilgar would do, based on everything that he does in Dune, to say, okay, what you said is confusing, and ultimately what we need is a path forward, and that path forward is whether or not you're signing this piece of paper.
He's a man of action. He's a man of things he can touch and see and feel.
Right.
He's not out here trying to talk theoretical time, space with the Messiah.
Right. Exactly. He's like leaving that to Korba. You're right. This is what made him a nape. I mean, he's a man of action. He's a man of, there are things I'm not going to understand, but what I need to do is be able to act. And
yes,
this is brilliant, brilliant character writing from Frank. We also get 3 more sort of rapid fire discussions here, each with their own sort of little takeaway. Up first, a constitution request from Chom. And in
bold
short,
of them.
bold. Yeah, bold. In short, Paul's like, no. Very officially, fucking no.
Right.
The next topic, the Ixian Confederacy wants to pay fewer taxes. But again, Paul leverages his Tupil signature with the guild against any possible complaints. You're going to fucking pay, or you're not going to be able to travel. Ixians who rely on trade and travel for all of your money. So, done. Shut that down. And then finally, Irulan's father, Shaddam IV, remember him, he's been left with, and I thought this was nice, he's been left with a police force, a personal police force. It is quite a few men. He was left with a whole legion of Sardaukar, which, again, as we pointed out in one of the morsels at the end of the first book, is about 30,000 Sardaukar, which...
Wow.
That's so many men. The recent report is that Shaddam, with this personal police force that he's really been given generously, he's been drilling them on landing maneuvers. Just fucking suspicious, Shaddam. What are you doing? What are you doing, Shaddam? I saw you vent, you dumb bastard. What are you doing? You're clearly the imposter.
Right.
Irulan's like, what? No. What if he's bored? I don't know. Like, it's nothing. Paul's like, Irulan, shut up. Tell your dad if we catch him doing that again, he's gonna die. Like, I don't know what to tell you. And it's not even, to be clear, Paul's not even saying, I'm going to go kill him or Alia's going to go kill him. Paul and Alia are pointing out here, Irulan, you don't get it. If one of the Fedaykin, if one of these commanders of the jihad find out that Shaddam, the heretic who doesn't believe in God Paul, is doing anything vaguely threatening, they will fucking kill him. He doesn't understand the danger he's in. And I kind of love this because this is, to Evan's question, a reminder that Paul isn't necessarily in control.
Right.
Paul can be like, yo, Irulan, he's safe as long as he doesn't draw the wrong attention. Because if word gets out, if someone tweets about him doing landing maneuvers, bro, he's done. He's no chance.
Right. And I, the emperor, can no longer guarantee his safety.
Yeah. My Fedaykin are wild. You tell him to watch himself. And she's like, okay, sure. The next topic in the meeting is one that Paul basically tries to dodge. It's about the Bene Gesserit wanting a kid from Paul. Paul tries to dodge this. He's like, nah, give them the normal excuses. Moving on. And Irulan's like, please. And Paul doesn't even say anything else. He just nods his head sharply, which we'll talk about kind of what he's saying and not saying again in the takeaways briefly. But Chani does persist here. And again, tragically, Chani doesn't know that she's being issued contraceptives by Irulan. So in addition to this just being sad, right? Like Chani's like, I don't know what to do. You should have a son. I'm kind of with Irulan on this. Irulan then has the fucking gall to try using the voice on Paul.
This made me mad.
I got actually angry. I was like, Irulan, sometimes you're just a little bit absent-minded. This is so fucking dumb. What are you doing?
This is beyond your capabilities, and you know it.
Check yourself. It's just an absurd attempt. And Paul, perhaps mirroring our outrage and anger, Abu, gets up from the table and just walks away. Doesn't say anything. Walks to the window, just looks out over the city. Everyone at this point is like, oh my God, he's so mad. Ooh, Irulan, you fucked up. Like, everyone's kind of quiet, waiting to see what he says. But internally, he's literally just fantasizing about running away. He's like, to Peel, speaking of it, thinking about it these days, what if we went there? What if Chani and I just fled, went there? Wouldn't that be great?
Again, mirroring the words of his own father at the start of the first book.
Yo, good point. He pictured, what if we just fled the system, right?
Yeah.
And it's in this spiraling moment that Chani takes his hand. She slips her hand into his, and we get a sense in this moment of just how much he means to her, but also how intuitive she is, how intelligent she is, and how much she grounds this Godhead to mortality, and how much she ties him to kind of who he is and who he was and who he will be. Anyway, so he turns around and he says no to Irulan. He's like, no, I thought about it, no, you're not going to have a kid. The final piece of business to kind of wrap up this meeting is the Spacing Guild, who is requesting basically forming an embassy on Arrakis. Now, so far, this has been denied because the Fremen just don't like the guild. But for now, Paul is like, you know what? Let's meet with the steersman, because I've seen this meeting happen in my visions, basically. Irulan shits a brick. Irulan's like, what?
Oh, no.
What? Sorry, excuse me, you saw this meeting? And Paul's like, no, I also love this writing. Paul mimics her tone. No, I didn't see the meeting. Idiot. So petty. So funny.
Yeah.
So funny to me. He's like, no, I didn't see the steersman, you dummy. I can only see where one has been, kind of is, and will go because I don't see them, right? It's like the gaps in my vision, I can tell where they're going to be. So I know that the meeting happens in my visions because I see this blank spot. And Irulan is like, oh, thank God. Okay, now just to find out if he's allergic to peanuts. No, just kidding. She's like, okay, we're safe, we're good. He can't see prescient beings. Cool.
Right. It confirms their theory and lets her know the conspiracy is safe.
Yeah, except still Alia. Stop relaxing, Irulan.
Alia over there, the wild card.
Yeah.
Speaking of Alia, let's move on to chapter 7. The final chapter for today's reading starts off with Alia looking down onto the throne room from a little spy window of hers as Edric, the Spacing Guild envoy, and his entourage arrive. And in that entourage is the Duncan, Idaho Gola that we talked about in the previous book club.
Right. Here he is.
Here he is. In the flesh. In that sexy flesh.
Hot flesh.
Edric presents this gift, this Duncan, Idaho Gola, to Paul. And we learned that the Gola's name is Hayt. Hayt. Quote, Sire, there's no divining how or why the Tleilaxu bestow names. End quote. I don't know, Edric. I don't know, my guy. This one seems pretty fucking on the nose.
Although, actually, to be fair, to be fair for Frank's writing, there is a kind of deeper level here. And this was brought up in the Discord by Robert Pierce. This is actually potentially a reference to the Arabic word for life, hayat. Sort of double meaning, play on words, a little bit of a pun, but utterly lost on us. Like the idea, and again, it's brilliant. If this is a little bit conjecture, but it's brilliant to name a gola, something who's been brought back to life or life that is created, as the Arabic word for life or a play on that word. But yeah, maybe just in defense of the name hate, which just, God, it sounds dumb. No, it's not. It doesn't sound that dumb. It sounds dumber than it looks. I'll just leave it at that.
Yes, when you're reading it, you can kind of ignore the fact that it's hate. But when you have to talk about it out loud in a podcast, you're suddenly like, wait a second. This guy's walking around being like, call me hate.
It's like a WWE character. You're like, okay, fine, whatever.
Right. Undertaker versus hate tonight at 9.
Sunday. Yeah.
With a surprise appearance from Love.
And Paul.
All hail the Emperor.
Hey.
Moving on from silly names, the gift has been presented to Paul, and Paul and Stilgar are naturally suspicious of this, quote, Tleilaxu thing, as they refer to it. And so Paul questions hate. But all throughout this conversation with hate, Paul is kind of feeling these powerful emotions that, as we know, the reader knows, the conspirators hoped he would feel. Quote, Paul felt himself tempted to reject the gift. Even as he felt the temptation, he knew he couldn't choose that way. This flesh made demands on House Atreides, a fact the enemy well knew. End quote.
Oh, there it is. That Atreidian honor.
That honor. They're using that against him and also reminding him of it.
Loyalty goes both ways. Again, it's a give and take. That's what made the Atreides as powerful as they were.
Right. And ultimately, what the conspirators want happens because Paul ends up accepting this gift, knowing full well that it is some sort of trap. He still cannot reject it. He then dismisses Edric and informs him on the way out. He's like, hey, close the door. Also, by the way, postscript.
Yeah.
Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Moheim has been apprehended and she is in the dungeons. Quote, her presence on your ship will be an item in our talks. End quote. Holy shit.
I love it. Oh, hey, by the way, before you go, fucking arrested Moheim. Hope you're cool with that. We'll talk about it. I mean,
yeah.
We're going to fucking talk about it, guy.
Right. Jesus. That's like when your parents are like, have a good day at school. We'll talk about your grade card when you're home.
You're like, okay, how do I never go home again?
Right. You're just sweating the whole day at school. Ugh, that is a very particular example for a reason.
I was going to say, actually don't relate, but I learned a little bit about you today, Abu.
Now, once Edric leaves the room, I'm sure profusely sweating in his tank.
Oh, fuck.
Right. Oh, fuck. Hate and Paul then have a bit of a heart-to-heart, and Paul just drops all pretense. He cuts to the core of it. Quote, what should I do to protect myself from you? End quote. And Hate's response is just as direct. Quote, send me away, my lord. End quote. And we know that Hate is not playing some deeper game here. We know that this is supposedly the truth from him because Hate is both a Mentat and a Zen-Sunni philosopher, which, as Paul puts it, is a quote-unquote double ration of honesty.
Right.
Now, as they sort of have this small talk about Zen-Sunni philosophy, Hate's throwing philosophical ideas at Paul. Paul is countering. Paul is trying to decipher how the heck this Gola is meant to take him down. Like, what is the plot within plot here? what are the conspirators hoping to achieve?
Why are his pockets stuffed with peanuts? Like, what the fuck?
Right. What's with all the peanuts? I love peanuts.
I love them.
Hit me with that crunchy peanut butter.
Just that crunchy squad rise up.
And in a gut-wrenching conclusion to this little chat that they have, Haight repeats himself. Quote, "Send me away, sire," Haight said. And it was Duncan Idaho's voice, full of concern for the young master. Paul felt trapped by that voice. He couldn't send that voice away, even when it came from a Gola. "You will stay," he said, "and we'll both exercise caution." End quote.
Oh.
That was painful to read. For me, the minute I read Duncan Idaho's voice, full of concern for the young master, I was like tearing up.
Yeah, it's, again, we don't get a lot of time with Duncan in Dune before he's fucking killed, but it's clear that he was one of Paul's only friends. Again, Paul didn't really have a lot of peers on Caladan, and the idea of him seeing, with the exception of the metal eyes, his old friend, his old teacher, his old comrade, all of that brotherly love being there for Paul and entrapping him emotionally. It's tragic. It's so heartbreaking.
Yeah, such a powerful conversation back and forth. During all of this, by the way, Alia is still in her little spy hole, her little spy window, looking down on what has just traversed. And she is just as suspicious of this Duncan Idaho Gola as everyone else is in the room. But she does weirdly find herself drawn to this Gola, which of course we can't blame her for.
Sure.
Quote, "She felt a positive desire to be near this new man, perhaps to touch him. He's a danger to both of us," she thought. End quote.
Yeah, same.
Yep.
It's Duncan, Idaho. Come on. Yeah. Weird. I'm like super attracted to this very attractive man. It defies explanation.
Yeah. And again, exactly what the conspirators wanted.
Yeah. The Tleilaxu called it.
The Tleilaxu called it.
Yeah.
And that's where we end this chapter and today's section of the reading. This ominous note: Duncan has been accepted into the imperial household, and things are seemingly going just as the conspirators hoped.
Good Lord. Man, for a few chapters that are mostly people talking.
Yeah.
This is so intense.
I know.
Well, with the summary out of the way, we're going to talk about our key takeaways. But first, we're going to take a quick break. So stick around. When we're back, we're going to talk about Muad'Dib the Messiah. Stay tuned.
Okay, welcome back, folks. Let's jump right into our takeaways for today's reading. So this first takeaway, I really wanted to kind of dig deep into Muad'Dib as this prophetic figure, as this god for the Fremen and for the people of the Empire. In today's reading, we get some more concrete examples of what exactly that might entail for him. We see that responsibility that he's very much got senioritis about, leading the prayers for all the pilgrims that show up. We see a little bit more of what it actually means for Muad'Dib to be that Messiah for the Empire, for the Fremen, and for Paul himself. So I wanted to dig a bit deeper into that.
Yeah.
So let's start with the Fremen. Clearly, there are fanatical supporters of Paul and his religion. There's the Kizarate, which we talked about. There's Korba sitting on his council, although put a pin in that because he clearly has some ulterior motives and a bit of a lust for power.
Right.
And then on the flip side, there are the Farouks of the world. And obviously in these readings, we spent quite a bit of time with Farouk, and he did a lot of reminiscing about his beliefs and his past. So we got this clear view of how disenchanted Farouk is with Paul, the jihad, and like I said earlier, basically everything that happened from the moment the Atreides touched down on Arrakis all those years ago.
Yeah. I mean, even going back, like, real early on, we had Jameis, who's like, nah, I don't think he's the main character. There have always been Fremen who were skeptics, Fremen who were maybe not as sold. They weren't as hopped up on that Messiah juice.
Yeah.
And Farouk is certainly emblematic of that at this time, right? He's looking back, he's reminiscing. He's going, man, it was better. It was simple. We had our way of life. I was proud of our way of life. And then the Atreides showed up and everything changed from there. And although he didn't challenge Paul one-on-one to ritual knife combat the way so many Fremen did, we learned in Dune, so much so that Chani literally had to kill someone just to be like, God, this is getting out of hand. Let me just knife some of these people and then they won't want to fight you. And Paul's like, okay, good call.
Like Jason put it in our previous episode, they fucked around and found out.
They fucked around and found out. They literally asked for it.
And it's clear that Jameis and those other Fremen who challenged Paul in his legend were not an anomaly. Farouk has always been skeptical. He tells us this. Quote, men pointed to the first moon and said his soul is there. Thus he was called Muad'Dib. I did not understand all of this. End quote.
Yeah.
He's never bought into this whole Muad'Dib, Paul is the Messiah idea.
He's like, that doesn't really look like a mouse to me on the moon. God, it looks so much more like a little fox. I don't know. You guys are weird.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And this is so thematically important in this book because a big part of this sequel, a big part of Dune Messiah, and why I personally think it's so important to read it to understand Frank's message and the Dune story as a whole, is because this sequel is meant to subvert many of our expectations coming out of the first book. It is meant to burst our bubble of what we thought was a hero's journey that Paul went on, what we thought was a victory for Paul at the end of the book. It's clear that what took place in the first book was just one side of a very complex story, and now here in Dune Messiah, we're getting the messier, darker side of it.
Yeah. This is also why I think it's really probably pretty necessary for Villeneuve to do a trilogy.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, this is just could be construed as another kind of cut and dry hero tale. You're absolutely right.
Now, this overall pessimism that we see throughout Messiah, this darker side of the story, extends even to the people that ostensibly support Muad'Dib. We discussed in the last episode in the morsels that the Kizarate are the religious missionaries in Paul's empire that are spreading the word of his godhead across the stars.
Right.
And outwardly, Korba is the leader of the Kizarate. They give him the title the Kizarat, and he sits on Paul's council and presumably supports the emperor in all of his initiatives. But Alia, being the absolutely incredible badass that she is, calls his ass out. And it's clear that the Kizarate aren't exactly the most popular group.
Right.
Quote, I know what's being said about your Kizarate. You're not divines. You are God's spies. End quote.
Woof.
Cutting right to the core of it. Ali's not here to fuck around.
Right.
And that reveals to us that these religious missionaries might actually skew a bit more secret police.
I mean, I keep bringing it up, but fucking Bronzo out here getting secretly abducted to dungeons and then executed.
Right.
Is very secret police of the Kizarate. That rings that bell for me. No kidding.
Yeah, definitely. And, this isn't conjecture and this isn't us reading too much into it. Korba himself as a character in the writing is presented as this untrustworthy and shady person who clearly has designs of his own. One of the most powerful moments in this chapter was when he returns from leading that prayer out on the balcony in Paul's stead, and we get this pretty shocking quote. Korba took his seat at Paul's left, dark features composed, eyes glazed by fanaticism. He'd enjoyed that moment of religious power. End quote.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Oh my God. He got a taste of Paul's power and loved it.
He's into it. Yeah, no kidding.
And that should throw up red flags. He's presented in such a way that we have to assume that Korba has his own motives, has his own lust for power.
Right. I mean, this dude's eager also. Like, later on, the Constitution's being brought up, and Korba's like, religious constitution. That'd be great. And Paul's like, no, shut up. God damn it, Korba. You're so
Right.
eager. Such a suck up. But as we're seeing, some of that might be out of his own desire for power.
Right. Okay, let me wrap up this first takeaway about Paul's Godhead, because there's one more thing we haven't talked about, and that's the pilgrims that are always in Arachne, that are coming and traveling to Arachne in droves. In that council meeting, when Paul walks away, everyone's like, oh shit, he's fuming. He's fuming, love. Paul walks to the window and looks down at this throng of pilgrims who have come to Arrakis. And we get this quote. Pilgrims, their exercise in homelessness had become a disgusting source of wealth for his imperium. The Hajj filled the spaceways with religious tramps. They came and they came and they came. End quote.
Mm.
That's what Paul is thinking right now about the people that worship him.
Yeah, he's not really into it.
He's not into this at all. The disgust is palpable. And he wonders why these pilgrims are showing up. Like, what is compelling them to travel here to Arrakis to find some sort of absolution? And he thinks, quote, what was it the pilgrims really sought? Paul wondered. They said they came to a holy place, but they must know the universe contained no Eden source, no tupil for the soul. End quote. Wow.
So,
Tupil for the soul.
It's so good.
It's so good. And again, just clues us in to how Paul's Godhead is having an effect on everyone in the Empire, right? And it's no longer just the Fremen worship him. Every planet that is consumed by his empire, his galactic empire,
Right.
buys into Paul as the Messiah. And he observes this. He thinks to himself, quote, they came out of gratitude for the peace of Muad'Dib. Everywhere there is peace, Paul thought. Everywhere, except in the heart of Muad'Dib. End quote.
That's like an
Oh my
Evanescence lyric. That is
Yeah.
bleak. Also,
Right.
the thought occurs to me, even Paul is sort of thinking in these dichotomous terms of Paul Atreides and Muad'Dib, Messiah of the Fremen,
Yeah.
It's a duality that existed from the moment of him sentencing Shaddam to Seleucus Secundus and taking all of his money, until now, where even now Paul is thinking in the term of Muad'Dib and Muad'Dib's heart. It's your heart. You are Muad'Dib, but in many ways Paul is, and in also many ways Paul is not.
Yeah, definitely. A tragic character. Okay, let me wrap up this takeaway.
Sure.
All of this is to say that it's clear that maybe the only guy out there who believes less in Muad'Dib than Farouk is Muad'Dib himself. He is disgusted by this whole prospect of him being a god and people worshiping him. This has been thrust upon him. And it's important to remember, just like we talked about with Evan's questions in the mailbag section at the top, being a god doesn't give Paul the unlimited power and control you'd expect. And in many ways, he's boxed in by everyone's expectations and the responsibilities of being a god. Again, he tells Korba to go lead that prayer, but how many hundreds and hundreds of times has he led that prayer? Because he's felt obligated to.
Right.
And so it's clear that despite being a Messiah, despite being a god, despite being worshipped by millions of pilgrims that travel to Arrakis, it's clear that the more power Paul gains, the less power he can actually exert, which is a really wild and interesting paradox in the way that power often works, even in the real world.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, into our second takeaway, and these two next takeaways are pretty quick. The first is about Paul's explanation of why he can't simply see Tupil. And I do think that this is interesting because it does build our understanding of maybe how Paul and his prescience work together and how it definitely doesn't work. We've talked at length about the issues with prescience, and so we can kind of keep this brief. But when Paul is asked if he could simply see the path into the future that would lead to Tupil, which makes perfect sense, he has some thoughts to share, but he finishes on this thesis. Quote, "Were I to seek Tupil with prescience," Paul said, "this might hide Tupil." End quote. But taking a step back, Paul has this internal reflection. Quote, "How could someone who'd never experienced the spice change of prescience conceive an awareness containing no localized space-time, no personal image vector, nor associated sensory captives?" End quote. Which,
wow.
I mean, what does that even mean? But my general understanding of this is, again, you can't understand prescience until you experience it. And once you experience it, you realize it's not as simple as, I can figure out what's going to happen for me. It's way less personalized. It's way broader a vision. So much so, sometimes it's debilitating.
Yeah, exactly. Prescience is just an indescribable thing that you just won't understand until you can do it also.
But also, I can't help but think about this sentiment applied to more broadly the themes of the first book. Paul says, looking for Tupil may hide Tupil. And I can't help but think of a younger Paul Atreides, still trying to figure out prescience, still trying to find these rules, saying, now in retrospect, were I to try to stop the jihad with prescience, this might guarantee the jihad.
Yeah.
I mean, God bless.
Tough stuff.
Messiah is, what a book. And then our final takeaway, briefly touching on, we saw some similarities in this council chamber, as well as in the then conversation with Hate. We see some similarities between Paul and his father, Duke Leto Atreides. And I wanted to take a moment to kind of talk about bravura. Hand in hand with his kind of status as God, Paul in these sections is clearly stuck in this kind of ongoing game of perception and expectations. What are the different power players in the room, and how does he have to appear to everybody all at once? And he's tired. He's tired of it and exhausted. This is why he takes these nighttime strolls through Arrakeen.
Oh, yeah.
Between Stilgar, his old friend but now worshiper, the Kizarate, which I've said 3 different ways this episode, and Irulan, who's, not only Irulan who wants a baby with him. She's like, fucking give me that seed! Also, she's representing, of course, the Bene Gesserit and the Spacing Guild. The only person in this room on Paul's side is basically Chani. As a quick side note, Chani taking his hand is genuinely one of the sweetest moments in Dune so far.
Oh my God. The way it just grounds him.
Oh, and just, it comes out of nowhere. And we get the only other perspective is everyone's afraid of Paul because he's upset. But she knows to be near him and she knows to approach him. It's like, it's just so good. Chani is so good.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, only she can approach him. Like,
right.
If Korba walks up and is like, let me take your hand, sire.
Korba slips his
hand. Beat the back of Paul's hand, Korba, you dumbass. Go sit back down.
Yeah. That's the fan fiction. Yeah. Stilgar slips his hand into Paul's. Paul's like, oh, still. Anyway, sorry. Tangent. Yeah. Great point. It is only Chani who knows that she can do this. I also, of course, I'm reminded of Chani going, fucking lay down, Paul. What are you doing?
Right.
And Paul going, wow.
She is his rock.
Yeah, absolutely. She knows when to tell him to take his boots off and lay down.
And then take his pants off.
Ayo. Yeah. Now, in this section, Paul is often lost in his thoughts. But if we take a moment and assess kind of what he's actually saying outwardly, he is careful. He is projecting a sense of kind of, I see it as like caution, aloofness. He's only speaking when he really needs to. He's not really being a part of these longer conversations. He's being concise. He's being purposeful with what he says and does. And oftentimes he'll say something and then go, how are the Kizarate going to respond to this? How are they going to use those words? Interesting.
Right.
And this calls to mind for me Duke Leto Atreides in those first parts of Dune. We saw him having the conversations that he needed to have, but otherwise being pretty stoic and pretty self-assured and pretty, he is the leader of House Atreides. He's the leader of Planet Caladan. And yet, we have a despondent Duke Leto in a moment of vulnerability talking to Paul, saying, quote, "Nothing wins more loyalty for a leader than an air of bravura," the Duke said. "I, therefore, cultivate an air of bravura." End quote.
Wow. R.I.P. Duke Leto.
I know, that beard. And also, again, this is like the same chapter where he takes the anti-fatigue pills because he hadn't slept for 3 days. And he tells Paul, I have to be able to tell someone this. Like, I just need to be able to be vulnerable with someone, Paul. And that chapter was mind-blowing for me, and I think for a lot of people, because until that chapter, and after that chapter even, we forget, but after that chapter even, Duke Leto is the stoic, charismatic, sure-footed leader. To see how tired and frustrated he was absolutely eye-opening. And here we are, 15 years later-ish, and Paul is stumbling his way into those same traps, into those same behaviors. And finally, to kind of wrap up this thought, this rambling takeaway, the Bene Gesserit and the Bene Tleilax clearly are hoping to, with hate, remind Paul of a more moral time, the time of House Atreides and the time of Duke Leto. But in so many ways, Paul is his father's son, and we see that. We're not told it, but we're shown it in these chapters. And Paul is Muad'Dib. He's the Kwisatz Haderach. He's a byproduct of the Bene Gesserit, the Missionaria Protectiva, and also generations and generations of breeding. But as Moheim points out in the movie, in Villeneuve's movie, you have more than one birthright, boy.
Ooh, yep.
Paul is an Atreides, and we see that, and we're shown that in these chapters.
That's right. And that's today's takeaways, folks.
Woo!
The many hats that Paul wears. Paul as the Messiah, as this Godhead. Paul trying to explain the visions to his council and being unable to do so. And the parallels of Paul to his father, this air of bravura, having to be the emperor, never letting his guard down, always putting on the appropriate face when he is in front of someone else.
Right.
And Chani maybe being the only person he can take the mask off with. It's wild stuff, and it just continues to paint this very tragic figure of Paul Atreides, Paul Muad'Dib Atreides. I love it.
That's so good.
Alrighty. So up next, we have our spice morsels. There are so many goodies in this section. But before we dive into those deep dive lore nuggets, we're going to take one more quick break. But don't go anywhere. When we come back, we're going to talk about Tleilaxu face dancers, Tleilaxu eyes, and much more. See you in a minute.
Welcome back. Hope you enjoyed your break. Let's get into these morsels. So the first one, we have the Tleilaxu face dancers and their genders, I guess. So, God, there is so much to say about the Bene Tleilax spy, assassin, dancer folks. And as tempted as I am to take like 45 minutes to talk about it right now, so we don't have to do a Tleilaxu episode at some point, I feel like this episode's already going to be long. So let's briefly touch on what you need to know moving forward. Face dancers can shift their appearance and voices to look and sound like anybody they've had time to observe. Master face dancers could even fool the closest associates of a target, though they needed appropriate time to kind of observe before their impression would be foolproof. The question might come up in your mind, How'd they do that? How can they do that? How are they able to do that? Especially because they are, to be clear, humans. They are not some weird alien creature. The Dune Encyclopedia specifies, quote, Tleilaxu endowed the face dancers with these abilities by a combination of rigorous training, embryological manipulation, and incredibly delicate surgery, end quote. Now, recall what Scytale thought earlier during his kind of time with his co-conspirators. Quote, they were all products of profound pranabindu training, capable of muscle and nerve control, that few humans ever achieved. But Scytale, a face dancer, had muscles and nerve linkages the others didn't even possess, end quote. So, kind of in summary, pranabindu, sure, but also surgery and embryological manipulation to have more muscles and nerve linkages than the average fella. Dangerous. They're dangerous. That's the point.
Yeah.
Face dancers are dangerous. They can look like anybody, sound like anybody. With enough time to observe a character, they can become exactly them so that their close friends, colleagues, even lovers wouldn't notice.
Lovers?
Lovers, multiple. Again, we out here in Arrakeen. It's hot. You got to escape the heat somehow.
Everybody confront your spouse. Double, triple check that they're not a face dancer.
Indeed.
Unfortunately, this next morsel is also about the Tleilaxu. Sorry for the double whammy of Benny Tleilax, but we got to talk about those Tleilaxu eyes. We get multiple references to these eyes in this reading. The first one is when Scytale and Farouk are speaking, and Farouk mentions that he tried to buy Tleilaxu eyes for his blind son. Quote, I offered to buy Tleilaxu eyes for him from your masters, but there's a story in the legions that Tleilaxu eyes enslave their users. End quote. And look, it's well established on this podcast that we're no Benny Tleilax fans,
right.
And the rest of the Imperium agrees with us. The Benny Tleilax don't exactly have a sterling reputation. Think then what it could mean if the Tleilaxu had control over your organs of sight.
Yeah, insane.
Not only what that means metaphorically, but literally, you may not be seeing reality as it exists because the Tleilaxu are tampering with it. That is a horrifying thought. Later on in today's reading, when Paul meets the Gola Hate, Paul muses to himself about the Tleilaxu eyes that Hate has. Quote, why, for example, the mechanical eyes? Tleilaxu boasted their metal eyes improved on the original. Strange, then, that more Tleilaxu didn't wear them out of choice. End quote. Great fucking point.
Yeah, calling them out on their fucking shit. Good job, Paul.
Right. Clearly, there is rumor that the eyes enslaved their users, but we don't have confirmation of it. All we can say is be careful at your next eye appointment, folks.
Try to really observe your doctor. See if they give off any signs that they're impersonating someone. Next up, we have Tupil. So we mentioned Tupil back in our first ever book club episode. Remember Duke Leto speaking with Paul. Quote, all fades before melange. A handful of spice will buy a home on Tupil. End quote. Now, back then it was kind of a throwaway reference to a far-off place, but now it comes up 9 times in this chapter. It's all over the place. Tupil this, Tupil that. As an example, Paul explains, quote, Tupil remains the place of sanctuary for defeated great houses. It symbolizes a last resort, a final place of safety for all our subjects. Exposing the sanctuary makes it vulnerable. End quote. Now, we talked about Tupil briefly in our spoiler-free episode, Planets of Dune, which you can check out. It's pretty cool. But the too long didn't read for today, the TLDR for today, Tupil's secret location is at the heart of all of the modern power structures in Dune and has been a perfectly kept secret for over 10,000 years.
Insane.
10,000-year secret. Crazy.
Wild stuff.
I can't keep a secret for 14 minutes, let alone 10,000 years. That's nuts.
Okay, I regret telling you some things now. We'll sidebar about that.
Abu likes pineapple on pizza.
You bastard! My sterling reputation ruined.
Everyone cancel him quickly. And that brings us to the end of episode 2.
That's it.
We did it. We did it. So for next week's reading, make sure that you've read to page 159 in the mass paperback edition, ending on the sentence, in case you have a different version, quote, "Perhaps no young woman is reported missing among the Fremen," end quote. Ooh.
That's right. I can't wait.
Ominous.
Why is she missing? Why hasn't she been reported?
Yeah. Maybe she is. Maybe she isn't. Who knows?
Find out on next week's episode of CSI Arrakeen. Well, friends, there is no real ending. It's just the place where you stop the recording. But this podcast is always one step beyond logic, so help spread the word of Muad'Dib and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. And be sure to check out the other shows on the Lore Party Podcast Network on loreparty.com. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at lore_party. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, he who controls the podcast controls the universe. We'll see you on the Golden Path.
All right. I'm going to tie my shorts. Make sure these don't come down during the recording.
Hello.
You never know when we're talking about hate and his unexplainable magnetism. God, how did my pants come off? This goal is good, guys. This goal is good. All right. Stilgar's like, why am I fully erect? The Tleilax who are like, oh, you know why. Bit of his flesh we used. Okay.